now I have to admit something right off the bat. Um, I I I know nothing about Duck
Okay.
Dynasty or any of that stuff.
Okay.
I'm a Canadian, and that I don't watch reality TV at all, and so a lot of that stuff is completely off my radar. So I actually hadn't seen the film and had no intention of seeing this film until a publicist approached me about it. Now that it's on digital,
Hmm.
and and then I noticed that you directed it, and that caught my interest because I'm a huge fan of Bible movies, and you've made two of them. So, is it okay if we talk about a bit of that as well?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want to chat about, I'm game.
Okay. All right. What do you want to do first?
Yeah, let's do those. That's great because then we'll get excited about it and let's talk about those.
Okay. Okay. I have to admit this all came together very quickly, so I haven't had a chance to rewatch them recently. But I have seen them both a couple times at least, um, and it's interesting actually. Maybe we can connect the two things together right off the bat. It's interesting how like perhaps you are best known for doing those. Um, and I looked at your IMDb page, and there's a few films there as well that I hadn't heard of, and so I don't know how high a profile they have. But you've made a couple of films about these New Testament saints, if you will, and now your biggest film since that is this film about a modern American, very evangelical. Um, uh, I mean, this is much more a conversion story.
Yep.
There's an element of a conversion story in Paul, Apostle of Christ, but it's very much backstory there, and a lot of it has to do with the modern, not modern, but the present day stuff of Paul in prison and all that. And whereas The Blind, structurally, it's very different. It's very much a conversion story. It's all about the life leading up to that moment of conversion, um, which in a way is very. For what it's worth, I grew up evangelical, and I'm now Eastern Orthodox, so I've been exposed to a few different sensibilities on this.
Yep.
So the conversion story aspect of The Blind is very um, typical, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's a type. It's the type of story that evangelicals tell, whereas perhaps the other stories are a little more uh, lives of the saints. It's sort
Yeah.
of so
Yeah.
so going from those kinds of stories to this story, what was
Mm.
it like making that shift? Which is a very general question, but we can get into details later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, it's a great question because I think that in the past, when I was looking at, as you said, the lives of the saints, there was a bit of a how can I make these figures relatable to an audience? Because I grew up Catholic, and I remember walking in the churches all the time, and you'd see these amazing, beautiful statues and the stained glass and the art, and it felt so unobtainable, right, to become a saint. It's sort of like, well, these are the holiest men and women who have lived, the last 2,000 years, and here we are, kind of, in a modern age. How is that obtainable, right? And so when I was
Right.
looking at, full of grace, Paul, apostle of Christ, how can I take a character like Paul and relate him to, a 21st century kind of audience that's, yes, loves history films, but maybe has a sort of separate kind of understanding of history and Bible, right? Is kind of unfortunately what we do in the church. The Bible exists here, history exists here. So how can we meld those two? And so I just, Paul to me felt like, okay, if I can take this sort of stage of his life, and you're right, yes, there's a couple little flashbacks of his conversion, but it's certainly not the bulk of the story. But really turn Paul into sort of a fatherly character that has wisdom. He's giving wisdom to Rome. That sort of felt to me like, okay, I think an audience will start hearing these words in a very new light. It won't necessarily be so far away. Oh, that happened so many years ago, and in Rome and all these things, but rather this is speaking to me. Paul's talking to me right now in my modern circumstance. And so when Phil's Robertson story, The Blind, came along, I think it was easy for me to see the transition into that because, again, I think Phil's story is so relatable, especially today. And people really do struggle with alcoholism and addiction and abuse and these really, really weighty things, even in the church. And so, again, I just, if I were going to kind of compare all the films, it's the relatability of the main character that gets me excited. If I say, wow, Phil's story could really resonate with people today, it could really be a message people need to hear, then I'm all in, then I feel like, okay, I think I know how to tell that story or grasp, some elements of that. And whether it's a saint, like you said, or it's a modern day sort of evangelical, that's what turned me on to the blind, to the story, is just seeing, wow, this family really struggled. And I agree with you. I had watched a few seasons of Duck Dynasty years ago, and I thought it was fun and funny and it had its little moments, but I didn't know sort of the weight of Phil's testimony until coming onto the film and really understanding, wow, without redemption, without Christ's kind of saving power, none of this exists. Duck Dynasty doesn't exist. There's no duck calls and family and podcasts and books and there's none of that. It doesn't happen. So if I could kind of put it into a short thing, I think relatability and redemption are the two pieces that get me really excited about stories.
Okay. It occurs to me another difference between the subjects is also, of course, the fact that Mary and Paul lived so long ago, and their lives are almost frozen in amber. You can, as a dramatist, you can do whatever you want now and not worry about surprises. Whereas, I mean, Phil is still alive, so there's the question of how much oversight is he giving you? Sort of like how much freedom do you have to tell the story you want to tell? Um, and B, and this is a different thing, but the title of your film reminds me of another similarly titled film, The Blind Side, which was very popular in Christian circles. What was it, 14 years ago, something like that?
Of that, yeah.
And now, lately, there's been stories that have been coming out about how things maybe weren't as rosy as they seemed at the time. So, I mean, when you're telling a story about somebody who's still alive, and there have been other cases like that, like Hotel Rwanda, and there have been other films about seemingly heroic people who are alive right now, and then 10, 20 years later, things happen that make you go, oh, do we have to rethink that? So when you're working on like with Mary and Paul, there's a certain safety in that the story is set.
Right.
Their lives are over. We know the narrative. We can now, dramatize it. Whereas, when you're telling a present day story, there's the potential for surprises.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and so, yeah, so those two basic
Yep.
things, like the potential for surprises and just the fact that Phil is around. And I mean, he gives like he addresses the audience at the end of the film. So he's very much involved in this film. So how does that affect, having him
Yeah.
looking over your shoulder?
Yeah, great question. So when I first came on board the project, I had read the script that they had currently had. And it was very anecdotal. It kind of had a Duck Dynasty feel to it. It was sort of a little more centric on kind of the family post fame and post money and and there were still little flashbacks and good moments for sure. But it felt like you just said, is this a marketing piece for the family? Is this like an endorsement for the family, or are we going to really kind of get into the meat and potatoes, really dig in to the history? And so I flew out, down to Louisiana and met with Phil. And the two things that kind of blew me away. Number one, he was like, I don't know why anyone would want to tell a story about me. I'm not, there was a humbleness and a humility there of like, I'm not that interesting. I don't know why you'd make a movie about it. But if Hollywood people want to do it, whatever. It was a very kind of hands off, but the more we start talking, you get really quick what's important to him. And it really is his faith. It really is sort of his drive to just help people find truth and beauty. And maybe that hasn't always come across in the Duck Dynasty show, but certainly now with his podcasts and stuff, he's got such a very focused kind of drives. So, the harder thing, you're right. You can upset Paul. Well, I don't know if I want to upset Paul, because if I get to heaven and he's upset about the film, I'm a little nervous about that. But you're right. Phil's alive. The family's very present, and so it really was about Phil. How far can we go in showing? I mean, basically airing your dirty laundry, right? I mean, that's really what the film does. It's sort of a, hey, are you willing to kind of unveil the skeletons in the closet for the world, in the hope that it helps people. It really could help people. And that was really all he said to me was, if you think this will help people, then tell the story the way it needs to be told. So from then on, it really was hands off. The bigger conversations we had with the producers, with some of the family, Corey Robertson, Willie Robertson, their nephew Zach Dasher, they were very critical to kind of helping guide, more like, oh, I remember when this happened, and you say, wow, that's a great anecdote, let's get that in there. Or I remember how what was playing on the radio when dad was fighting with us, those kind of things. But ultimately, we wondered, how far is this audience now willing to, how far can we push the audience with this kind of stuff? Because as you do this all the time, you see films all the time, there's a certain evangelical, I'll say, kind of approach to filmmaking where, okay, let's be careful about the swearing, nobody should be drinking, nobody should be smoking, no sex,
Right.
no, on and on and on and on. And so the bigger conversations with the family, there were some pretty dark things, obviously, that went on in this family's life. And it's sort of like, what's the audience ready for? Are they ready to see one of their heroes, like if he was still alive? Are they ready to see him drunk and smoking and sleeping around? Or are they ready to hear him curse? So a lot of that was kind of curated just from we still want this movie to be, accepted or relatable or even seen, right? We want the audience to show, because we do want it to help people. But if there was anything the family were really involved in, it was that, of like, okay, maybe this scene pushes the envelope a little too far. I don't know that the audience is ready for this. So how do we do this in a more artistic way? Or how do we do this in a way that we don't need to show it, we get it, and so that was always the balance. And I think, from all the, thousands and thousands of comments and letters we've gotten, it really has moved people, and it really has been something that has even changed people's lives. So I'm hoping we found a balance. We still get the odd letter that says, I walked out of the film 20 minutes in, I couldn't handle the cursing and the drinking. And so,
I was
but
going to ask about
but I never wanted, and neither did Phil, neither did the family. We never wanted to, yes, there's a balance, but we never wanted to take things so lightly that somebody sitting in the audience who really is struggling with these things, whether they're a church-going person or not, I mean, we all know it happens just as much in the church. We never wanted them to feel like, oh, my life's much worse than this. They don't get it. God won't forgive me. God won't get it. Because this is, if this is the worst Phil was, then what's the hope for me? So I think we did push the envelope. There were some unhappy people, but a lot of people were really moved. And so I think we did a great job.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was going to ask about, because I grew up watching a lot of Christian films, and I can remember seeing a Billy Graham film 40 years ago where somebody used the word puke, and I thought that was so daring. So, you know, your film goes a bit beyond that. But
We've come a long way. Yeah.
yeah. One other really interesting thing to me, of course, this film focuses very much on the marriage between Phil and Kay, and I'm going to tie this back to Bible movies again, because one of the really interesting things about your Paul movie, Paul Apostle of Christ, is the amount of screen time given to Priscilla and Aquila. I spoke to Dallas Jenkins a few years ago when The Chosen was still a fairly new thing,
Mhm.
and we talked about the fact that in the first season of The Chosen, Peter has a wife, and Nicodemus has a wife, and Dallas was like, I don't know if I've ever seen a married couple in a New Testament film before. And I said, well, Paul had Priscilla and Aquila,
Yep.
but like it's a rare thing. And uh, so of course, but very different
Yep.
kinds of marriages, of course, because Priscilla and Aquila are, fellow laborers in Christ with Paul, and Phil and Kay have to uh, they have all these issues they have to work through, as you were discussing, the drunkenness and all that other stuff. Um, but I don't know. Can you draw any parallels and contrasts there?
Yeah, I think it's I'm even kind of cataloging through my brain other films of it's difficult to find authentic strong marriages kind of portrayed, I think. And I don't know why that is, but Priscilla, like you said, yeah, they were such a beautiful couple to me, that they would be. And yes, there's little disagreements, but they're always coming together and praying and leading leading kind of with Christ, letting Christ lead is what I'm trying to say, letting Christ lead them in their marriage, in their ministry, and all these things. And this portrayal of Miss Kay and Phil, there were elements that were like, Priscilla and Aquila in Paul. It was almost just broken, right? It was like it just needed Christ at the center to then take off. And so you're right, there are parallels. And then to see kind of how their marriage has strengthened and what it is today, 40, 50 some odd years later, is incredible.
I
But
think
they be,
the end credits say that they've been together for 60 years.
I mean, incredible.
I
And
think, yeah.
and and they would be the first to say it's because Christ is now the center of their marriage and is leading them.
Yeah.
I was so blown away, in hearing the story, and then when we were writing the script and talking more and more with Miss Kay, I was just blown away by her strength. And maybe so often we see strong, independent women in film, but she has such a strength, but then such a love of her family and such a like wanting this to work with Phil. I was just blown away by just she really is the heart of the family. She took those boys, and she said, okay, if I have to make this work and I have to be the one that takes care of them, I'm going to take care of them, and I'm going to pray for Phil, but I've got to keep moving on. And then so yeah, I love that portrayal of when they finally do kind of, when Phil's saved and he comes to Christ, and and it's not easy, of course, it doesn't happen overnight. But that redemptive element that then brings them together. And then when you hear them today, I just think it's such a beautiful portrayal of what marriage can be. And same with Paul, Apostle of Christ, same with that marriage in there. I think they're more beautiful examples of a strong marriage with Christ leading would be awesome in films.
Yeah.
And forgive me if I'm forgetting some recent films that do that well, but yeah, that's an important thing I think that we've really lost in our culture, haven't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, you know, when you're talking about Bible stories in particular, it's very often focused on, like Jesus and the 12 disciples. They're all men and they all go around together. There are female disciples too, Mary Magdalene and so forth, but they're not married to the men. And so it's like singles everywhere. You get Mary and Joseph, that's about as good as you get. And
Right,
even there, there's, shall we say, different church traditions as to how regular a marriage it was.
right, right.
Um, so, but they're not your typical couple. So, uh, whereas we know, Paul writes in First Corinthians, he writes about Peter and
Yep.
the brothers of Jesus taking their wives with them on their journeys. So Jesus, at least has sisters-in-law, you know, if the brothers of Jesus are taking their wives with them. And Peter wasn't the only disciple who was married, because the disciples, I think, say as a group, didn't we leave our families to follow you? So
Right, right.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
it's just not something explored very often. So I was really grateful to see that highlighted in your Paul film. And uh yeah, by the way, I just looked up, sorry, I had to check, because you I said 50, you said 50, I said 60, and according to a very quick Google, a very quick off to the side Google, the Phil and Kay got married in 66, which would be 57 years ago.
Amazing.
So, but they may have been
Amazing.
dating before that, so it could be 60.
Amazing.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know.
amazing.
Yeah. Um, Actually, given that you're showing their family the way you are, I mean, like their sons are a big part of the Duck Dynasty. I mean, that's what the word dynasty means, right? So
Right.
their sons are a big part of the TV show too. And what input did their sons have into seeing their parents' relationship portrayed the way it is
Yeah.
at a point in time when their sons, their children, like they're only kids. They're not really active agents in the story in the same way the
Yeah.
adults are.
Yeah.
How did they,
Yeah.
because they're adults now, so how did they feel about seeing their parents portrayed this way? Did they have any
Yeah.
input into that?
They did. Yeah, they were very helpful and very supportive. Again, with the same heart behind it, the same heart of wanting to put something out in the world that hopefully can help people also find redemption. As you said, Alan was probably the one, who's the oldest. Probably has the most memories of that time, as opposed to Jace. Jace has a few, but Willie was really a baby. So yeah, there's
Mm.
there wasn't much as far as kind of memories per se, but Alan, Jace, and Willie, we spent a lot of hours with them, a lot of talking through, what do you remember? And then a lot of things, Miss K would remember maybe the details, but the boys will remember being there, and maybe in a more general sense of like, oh yeah, I remember dad yelling at mom or throwing things or breaking this, window or doing that. Like they did have pretty vivid memories. Alan definitely remembers a lot of the, working at the bar as a kid that Phil and Kay sort of pseudo owned. And kind of the memories from the fights that would happen there. And, he'd say every night, a fight would break out and his dad would come around and he was just kind of the biggest, scariest guy around. So everybody would listen to Phil and keep it under control. So there was a lot of that. I would say, probably the most emotional kind of things that happened with the family was when they were all sitting. We took a couple scenes. We started with a couple scenes. We sat the family down and they watched them together. And it was a really kind of emotional, powerful moment. A lot of tears, a lot of wanting to chat things out, because you're right. It's one thing, I think, to read about it or to hear about it, but when you see it, that's I guess the beauty of the medium of film that we love. It's just so much more impactful when you see it. So I think for them, and the performances are phenomenal. The cast did such a great job that I think it did kind of hit them in a way that they weren't expecting. And it was pretty emotional. And especially, when the film was finished, we got them all into the theater together to watch it with the extended family and friends. And yeah, I think it's a journey, right? It's an emotional journey to put yourself through. I mean, we all have our own demons and we're all wrestling with our own struggles. Everybody has something. But I think to experience it, right, to go back to sort of the worst moments of your life and have them be captured on film and to kind of reopen those wounds and re-experience all that, it's an emotional journey. So there were a lot of conversations, a lot of prayers, a lot of tears, but ultimately, when you walk out with them and Phil says, I want to add something to the end, I want to say something, you say, beautiful, like, let's do it. Or, hey, well done, like, you captured it. That's all we can ask for in a biopic. So, but yeah, I think having the family support, having them be so involved was really the only way to do this one right.
Okay. And I don't know how much attention you pay to the business side of things. Some filmmakers don't want to go anywhere near there. They just want to do the creative stuff. And,
Right.
but I gather that The Blind is now the top grossing Fathom Events release ever. And
Amazing. Yep.
how does that feel? What do you make of that?
Well, I'm in a way kind of going back to what we chatted about at the beginning. I'm really proud of the audience. I'm really proud that the audience showed up. They understood kind of the message and the mission of it. And I've gotten so many letters and emails and you check the comments on things, and people go back 2-3 times, and they bring friends and they bring family members. There's so many beautiful kind of just heartwarming, heartbreaking kind of stories that have come out of it, of taking an alcoholic father to a drug addicted son, all these things of, and how people have been really moved and changed, and they want to talk, they want to so anyway, yeah, it's amazing. The numbers are great. But I think I'm just so happy that this audience, and I feel like we're almost in real time, we're watching this audience grow up, almost like watching kids grow up, from Full of Grace to Paul Apostle of Christ to The Chosen to, there's so many films in between, and now this, and I just think they're almost growing, with the filmmakers, they're getting savvier, and they're getting, they're starting to be able to tell what's, oh, this is really good art, or versus, yeah, that I get the message and the heart behind this, but this wasn't, they're really starting to get savvy and understand the purpose of storytelling and films. Whereas I have to be honest, that, maybe this was just the community I was in, but 25, 30 years ago, I'd never hear any Christian talking about movies or films and the impact and all these things. But it, again, could have just been my, my community. But yeah, I'm really excited just to see the numbers as far as, keep showing up. These people keep showing up, and we can keep making great content, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, you used the word content. Sorry, I have to. That debate. There's movies, content, the whole sort of which terminology do we
Sure,
use?
yeah. Really good films. Let's say film stories.
You mentioned 25 years ago. Do you remember what the first like Christian movie to crack the top 10 was? The weekly top 10?
I mean, I'd say The Passion, but I'm sure it was something else
Oh,
that
no,
popped up.
The Omega Code.
Amazing. I
In
mean,
in 1999. It was I think it was released in only like 300 theaters or something,
yeah,
but
but
it had just enough of a fan base that it actually got to number 10
that's awesome. That's
on its
great.
opening weekend.
That's a
And
great
a lot of
trivia. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of the entertainment journalists who were used to covering this stuff, they were all like, "What is this?" And and it's oh, what's his name? Michael, the actor's name. Anyway, Michael York. Michael York really hemming it up as the Antichrist and stuff. But
Oh
it's
man.
kind of like it's kind of like it's certainly not, like uh um artistic, like it's not like The Passion, it's not like Paul Apostle of Christ, it's not going for historical or any of these things. It's a much cheesier, it's a beach read of a movie, it's it's
Right.
the
Well,
airport novel version.
yeah, I'll have to check it out just so I have a bit of history, and then I can answer that trivia question when it comes along.
Okay. But I remember, like you meant, but 25 years ago, that's when The Prince of Egypt came out, and that was when
Oh yeah,
there was
beautiful.
a lot of mobilization trying to get Christians interested in going to the movies for that, and a lot of the marketing infrastructure that built up around that led to The Passion of the Christ. I think there was a significant overlap there. But it's been a long time coming. Um, yeah, and it's been interesting too. I mean, things like Fathom being able to do these sort of specialty releases that end up being not so specialized,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
The Chosen. I think their first Fathom release was supposed to be just 1 or 2 days, and then they kept adding days, adding days, adding days. And was The Blind like that too? Because it played for like 3 weeks, I think, at least in theaters, and I think it started shorter.
yeah, yeah. It's a great question. So, one of the interesting things to us about Fathom was they really wanted to kind of take a crack at this being their first sort of, what would you say, kind of longer theatrical run. But even then, it was sort of a, hey, like any film today, unless you're a $400 million Marvel film, we can only guarantee you a week. It really is kind of, and then it's up to the numbers. So yeah, we were blown away. That was really cool to kind of each yeah. It ended up being kind of each weekend we'd hear, okay, we're going another week. Okay. Oh, we're going another week. Going another week. And I think it's finally wrapped as of last week. But yeah, I believe it was 5 weeks or something crazy, 37 days or something that it was in theaters. So again, like you said, that's really exciting too, you know, that you've got these outlets that are now kind of, okay, they're marrying the audience with the films, and then having sort of the legs to really, okay, it's not going to be one night only. We're gonna actually do a real theatrical run here. You know, Angel Studios is doing it, Fathom now. We'll probably see a couple more pop up, you know, and it's exciting. It just gives us an outlet to tell these amazing stories. And let's be honest, we already know the audience is out there and they're super hungry for them. So you do start wondering, okay, yeah, like if we can mobilize an audience and they support us, you know, we could tell, you know, 10, we could have 10 of these a year if we wanted.
Yeah, it's a huge change from the 90s when a lot of the sort of independent faith-based films were totally aiming at like the not even DVD, it was VHS market, you know, just pumping out VHS tapes, and that was sort of the main focus. I don't know if you remember, but the Left Behind film, the first Left Behind film was released on VHS before it went to theaters because they thought
Wow,
that
no,
would
I
help
didn't know that.
promote they thought that would help promote the theatrical release, and it didn't really. But that
Wow.
that was the mindset 25 years ago. Whereas now, yeah, you're getting these wide theatrical releases for films like yours.
Yep.
I have just two more questions. Zoom is telling me we have a few minutes left before I lose my free time allotment. But first, I understand you've got another biopic coming up called Sight, and is that finished, or is there a release date, or?
Yeah, it's still in post. We're hoping to release early, you know, spring next year. But yeah, amazing biopic about a true story about a doctor, Dr. Ming Wang, who survived the Cultural Revolution in China and made it to America with like $100 in his pocket. One of those stories, and yeah, just incredible kind of persistence. And you know, he's considered today kind of to be, you know, one of the top doctors in the world. So yeah, excited about that. Terry Chen and Greg Kinnear. So hopefully early next spring in theaters.
Okay. Did you shoot any of that in China?
We did not. You know where we shot it is in your backyard up in Vancouver there.
Oh no, no.
Yeah.
Why couldn't this have come 5 minutes later? Anyway, um, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Oh, this is awful. I'm gonna have to cut this out. And I have to ask, I would be remiss if I did not ask about your hat, the camouflage hat. Is that blind themed, or is that
I
just like
was
your hat?
I was going with a bit of a intentional you know, trying to shout out to the blind team and
Okay.
and the Louisiana boys. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so that's on brand marketing there,
Yeah.
and the costuming. Okay.
Yeah. I was thinking about wearing the, you know, the camouflage shirt too, but it's a little much, a little much.
Oh, yeah, maybe a little much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's been very good talking to you, and I look forward to seeing what you do next, especially if you got any more any more Bible movies coming along. And that is one genre I do keep on top of, and I really liked what you did with the two films you've done in that genre so far.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And thank you for the time.
All right. Talk to you later, maybe.
Thanks, man.